So good morning and welcome to this webinar, which is about knowing what results to feedback to customers. My name's Chris Elliott and I'm a client manager at TLF Research. And at TLF Research, we essentially work with organizations to help them become more profitable through the delivery of highly satisfied and loyal customers. We achieve that in part through the tactic of highly actionable customer satisfaction research. We work with a very diverse range of clients across a great many sectors. And as you can see there's a snapshot of some of the organizations that we work with or have worked with in more recent times. And there's no common pattern there other than the organizations that we work with typically understand the power and the impact that highly deliverable and actionable customer satisfaction research can be. Okay, that's the shameless self-publicity out of the way from the beginning. I will come back with a little bit more towards the end, but let's now focus on the webinar and specifically about feeding back to customers. We know that feeding back to customers is really important and is really crucial as part of your overall customer satisfaction research strategy. There's two reasons I believe it's really important. The first is when we consider from a very specific research or survey in itself. And we talk often about a model such as you see here, which is a customer feedback loop. Starts at the beginning with the measurements, the actual survey, but it also involves two key areas. Of course, the doing of stuff, the actual taking of action, but also the communication, that communication from an internal perspective and also communication from an external perspective with your customers. So that's one area that we know that communication is really important on a survey by survey basis. But of course, we also know that communication and feeding back is really important at a high level, at a strategic cultural level. And there is indeed some webinars that we've already presented and will be presenting in the future that talk about the traits of customer centricity. And my job today is not to necessarily go through these in any detail, but just to point out that two of the strong traits of world-class deliverers of satisfaction and service, two of those traits are related to communication. So we know that feedback is really key, both at an individual survey level and at a more overall holistic level within the organization. But that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't have its challenges. And whilst most organizations do customer research, the proportion of organizations that actually feedback and feedback really effectively are often very low indeed. And typically, from an organizational perspective, one of the key challenges that we have when knowing what results to feedback to customers is that they're unsure actually what kind of information they should be sharing with their customers. Should it be warts and all everything, or should it be just a highlighted sort of bulleted point address? But then if we flip it round, also customers have a view that often is that all you're telling me? Are you being truly honest with the information that you're providing me? Are you just telling me the good stuff? Are you actually sort of spinning it around and making it better than it actually is? So these are some of the core challenges that we have, and we'll hope to address those today in this webinar. And in this webinar, what we're going to have a look at what is feeding back, why we should feed back, ultimately how we feed back. And then we finish at the end we're going to talk an awful lot about customer feedback, but we should never ignore them, our employees, and what should we do when it comes to employees. So first step, what is feedback? Well, I often think that a dictionary definition is a pretty good place to start when we're considering defining what feedback is. And one that I found that I quite like is this. It's the process in which the effect or output of an action is returned or fed back to modify the next action. Well, the effect or the output of an action, when we consider that, the action is the customer satisfaction research. The effect or the output is ultimately the results. And the modifying the next action is the doing of stuff, the taking of action. So that's really what feedback is from a customer satisfaction research point of view. So why do we feedback? Well, at a very basic level, customers have ultimately given you their time. Time is expensive. So it's a way to say thank you. Quite simply, it's just polite manners to do so. Customers also want to know what you're going to do with the feedback that they've provided, ensuring that they don't feel it's been a complete waste of time. They also take part in the assumption that you will listen to their feedback. And this, in feeding back results, is an excellent opportunity to show exactly that you listen to their feedback. Customers, we also know, will be more satisfied knowing that you are taking action to improve their experience. They see a benefit in taking part in the research. The other thing why it's important to feedback is when it concerns customers who are more dissatisfied. I'm a firm believer that however dissatisfied your customers are, they are still your customers. They haven't left you. So there's always an opportunity to win them back. And if customers are on the verge of leaving you, feedback might just buy you a little bit more time, as they might believe that you are actually going to make change. They often give you the benefit of the doubt. Now, we talk often about customer satisfaction research as being an opportunity to feedback what you're going to do, but actually really effective communication often can demonstrate the things that you can't do or what falls outside of your sphere of influence and action. And the final thing is that feeding back actually encourages customers to take part in the next survey. It does have that magical effect. So that's why we feed back. Then who should we feed back to? And a common challenge that I find with clients that I work with is that they often believe that they should just communicate the results back to the people that took part in the survey. I don't agree with that. I believe you should feed back to all of your customers, whether they took part in the survey or not. The reality is that all customers want to know what action you are going to take, what you're going to do on the back of the survey. And again, customers may take part in the survey the next time around, irrespective of whether they haven't taken part in it in this wave. You should also not lose sight of who you should be feeding back to in terms of your internal customers, your internal stakeholders, and your employees. And we'll talk about a little bit about this shortly. So what do we say when we're feeding back? Well, the biggest and most important principle when thinking about what you're going to say to your customers is all about being honest. Honesty isn't just opening the floodgates and sharing everything in minute detail. Honest is a number of other areas. It is about telling customers ultimately the findings of the survey, but an overview can be fine. Too much detail actually clouds the message, so the less information that you can share, the better. So an overview is absolutely fine. But another element of honesty is actually that it's sometimes good to tell them the not so good news as well as the good news. Demonstrating your weak points actually can be a really positive thing to do. So we should never hide away from telling people where you think that we could be better, as opposed to just the good news. Also tell customers what action you are going to take. Ultimately, what you are going to do differently than what you do now. If you can't tell them what you're going to do right there and then, what you might want to do is just detail what the next steps are going to be. The detail obviously varies depending on the audience, but you can come back to customers with further communications once you've established exactly what you're going to do. It's just about giving them a train of thought that you are taking things seriously and you're going to do something maybe in the future. Another element of honesty for me is ensuring that whilst the message is not overly detailed, it isn't vague and woolly. So you're not, we don't need to go into forensic detail, but we don't want to ensure that it's just too vague, that it's just really not impacting on anything at all. The other thing is not to be too worried, might be the word, about ensuring that your competitors hear something about it. At the end of the day, you're not going to be telling something to your customers that they don't know already or that they've not heard from their customers. So I think that honesty again should come from this area as well. And at the end of the day, honesty means that you will get more respect from your customers. And also, if you're not being honest, they're going to work it out anyway. At some point, customers are way more savvy than we often believe. So that's what to say. But then how do we say it? Well, the first thing is to remind customers what your relative strengths are. Telling them how good you are, where your customers are scoring you highest is obviously something that you really want to demonstrate and really focus upon. But as I said on the previous slide, I think it's really good practice that you recognize what weaknesses you have too, without straying on the too negative aside. And that's a really good comment that we often see. There are areas where we can be better, such as the way that we keep you up to date about the progress of your claim. So you're turning ultimately a negative into a positive. But again, and it feels like there's a recurring theme here, I'm sure you'll agree. What's key is that you tell your customers what action you are going to take based on the survey findings and the responses from your customers. This is really, really key. So that's how to say it. Then what we should do is we should also consider the methods of sharing communication. And there's an increasingly large number of variations of marketing communications that you can use. Typically, the most used are infographics, be these leaflets, posters, or letters. Videos are increasingly being used by organizations to demonstrate the results from the survey. This can be animated, but also can be blended with a message from a person at the top of the organization. Newsletters, a great opportunity to write an article perhaps on the research results and what you're going to do on the back of them. Posting results on the internet and indeed within the intranet. Word of mouth is something that we always talk about as being hugely influential in customer satisfaction and loyalty. So it's a fantastic opportunity to share your results. Answer phone messages, email signatures, press releases and PR and publicity, social media, and events and conferences are all other examples of excellent opportunities to share the message that you want to feed back to your customers. Another key area is also when to feed back the research. And this is a common question that is often asked of most of the clients that I work with. The reality is that you can't do the feedback too soon. It should be very quickly after the survey is finished, so that customers are ultimately not wondering what's happened. Now, at that point, if you've decided already what you're going to do, fantastic, and use that as the opportunity to demonstrate what you're going to do. But if you haven't decided what to take, and we've mentioned this already, and you're not going to be doing anything soon, then tell customers the reality that that's what's happening. Communicate that you're actually still in the business of planning what to do, or that you're going to consult further before taking action. But that's the critical thing. Don't leave customers thinking that their feedback is being ignored, that it's not being taken seriously, and that it's ultimately not being used. That's the worst thing that you can do. Now, we've ultimately talked a lot there about customers, the external customer particularly, but there is another group of people who will benefit enormously from communication of survey results, and that's employees. We know that employees are a fundamental part of success in an organisation. From a customer survey perspective, the service profit chain, a model that we adhere to and strongly support, tells us that if employees are satisfied and engaged, they make customers more satisfied. So it's absolutely critical to involve employees within this survey process. Feeding back findings to employees is absolutely key. The last thing we don't want is for employees actually hear what's happening from the customer and not from ourselves. The same rules ultimately apply in that you're going to provide, but what you're going to do is provide a little bit more detail in terms of the feedback. You're still going to be open and honest about the findings, but it's important to consider who's going to be best to deliver the message. And there's a whole variety of roles and people within an organisation who might be suited towards delivering that. But recognise the importance of employee feedback in its ability to engage and motivate employees to actually take action. And again, it's critical that we're honest, and honest whilst not being demotivating. So to summarise, most organisations do customer satisfaction research. With good reason, it's relatively easy in the grand scheme of things. But less organisations communicate, and even less communicate really effectively and really well. And I think that you're missing a trick if you don't engage in that kind of communication. But it's all about sticking to the basics, not having a cluttered or complicated message. But it's ultimately about the feedback about what your customers are saying about you, and importantly, critically, what you're going to do about it. So I hope you've enjoyed that webinar, and just some sort of more shameless self-publicity towards the end in terms of some further reference. Of course, please don't hesitate to visit our website at tlfresearch.com for a huge range of insight and articles, and particularly point you in the direction of the area where we have our briefings and events and webinars. Particular attention towards our upcoming Customer Insight Conference in early November in London. We're also on LinkedIn, and you can follow us via the normal routes there. And also within LinkedIn, we have our new area called TLF Insight Unlocked. Again, a huge wealth of insight and articles all about the wonderful world of customer experience. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter. And for the final one, for those people who love podcasts, we have our own podcast, TLF Podcast, which you can find at the usual places where podcasts can be found. It's a fantastic source of interviews and insight from TLF and guest contributors. So I hope that you enjoyed this morning's podcast and found it interesting and informative. And I do look forward to hearing any feedback that you have in respect of the webinar. And I look forward to hoping that you join us again for webinars in the future. Thank you.